The new Imaginarium Theatre for June of 2025 has just came out, and this is where things are slightly different. So compared to the previous seasons of Imaginarium Theatre, this time you actually do have a motivation or an incentive to get Stellas. Now the rewards are as following. Getting 3 Stellas will reward you with some artifact enhancement bottles. 6 Stellas will give you 1 transient resin, which will last for about, I think, 14 days from the following Monday of which you claim it from. So the time of how long it lasts will depend. It's like the same as the transient resin in the teapot. And of course, 9 Stellas will provide the rare sanctifying elixir for your custom artifact crafting. So while Stellas are still not necessary in order to gain most of the clear rewards, you do now have an incentive to actually try your best to get as much Stellas as possible. Now, before we get going, the usual short disclaimer, I'm going to assume you have enough units to run all of these respective modes and that your characters are decently invested for this. And here are the visuals for all the respective information, as well as what you need in order to qualify for this game mode in the first place. Feel free to pause the video in order to take a look. And this image right now is all the different acts and what you can expect if you were to play, let's say, Visionary mode or all the other respective modes. It's a little bit different with the earlier difficulties, with that some bosses, I believe the third boss is not available in hard mode, so the order changes up a bit, but the rest, the whole idea of it is usually the same as always. So for this season of theatre, the elements are Electro, Cryo, and Dendro, making the possible reaction between Superconduct, Quicken, which leads to Spread and Aggravate, and of course, just Cryo and Dendro doesn't really have any new reaction, but we did get a new blessing which we'll take a look at a later section. As for the opening characters, which you have to pick between your own or the trial options, are Sino, Fischl, Chi-Chi, Mika, Nahida, and Kolei. As for the supporting cast or the special guest stars you can bring, which ignores the elemental restriction, are Furina, Dea, Xingqiu, and of course Sheng Ling. Now, quick general tips: if your characters are not well built enough and you do require an assistance, feel free to use the supporting cast and invite a character that is offered by any of your in-game friends if you do need the help. My recommendation is that it's best to use it if you do have friends that you know to have really well-built characters, regardless of their investment level, whether they are dolphins, whales, or any sort of long-term F2P veterans. Now, second flexible tip is generally try to prioritize characters over buffs, because if you do not have at least 4 characters for the Act challenge, you cannot do the challenge itself, which will lead you to fail and restart the whole run. In case you want to know how much you have, go check the performance detail tab in the bottom left part of your screen whenever you're in this Act section or not. However, if you do have enough characters, you can consider getting different buffs, which will be explained in a separate section later. Tip number 3 is to always choose weaker enemies for an easier time, because you do not gain any real benefit for giving yourself a challenge, and examples will be provided in the section after this. Tip number 4 is to try to throw away all your weaker or less infested units in earlier acts, particularly Act 1 and Act 2, but if your team is not strong enough or you don't have the blessings that can carry you, you might want to consider maybe putting 1 or 2 of your well-built units just to ensure that you can get the Stellas earlier on. And just a quick reminder, while it is not mandatory to get the Stellas to obtain most of the rewards available, you now have an incentive to get Stellas, notably for the Sanctifying Elixir when you have 9. So you don't necessarily need to get 10 Stellas unless you want to get it for bragging rights, but it is something you can strive towards going to. And without further ado, let's go start with Act 1. So for Act 1, usually every act has about 6 options, and I'll break down slightly on which are the best and which can be the ones that I don't recommend picking. Of course, the best one's going to be the combination of the Ruin Grader as well as the Ruin Drake Earthguard. There's nothing notable about them, they're very straightforward enemies, and out of all of them, they have the lowest amount of DPS and lowest amount of total HP. So if you do get this option, you will be essentially having an easy time to get the free Stella. The Earthguard does have a mechanic where it charges up an attack and its eye glows. Try to break it with any relevant attacks, whether it be bow characters or certain abilities like Xingqiu's elemental skill, or once it goes low enough, you can probably do a charge attack or certain melee hits in order to hit it, but generally just try to not let it do the charge attack move, and if it does, you can find opportunities later to break it to actually stun it for a short period of time. Now, for the semi-doable option, we do have the Thunder Wayop Manifestation. This guy will start with the Trials move, where it creates a field that absorbs all energy for the next 13 seconds, and it will create a white shield. The white shield can be taken down with sufficient damage, of which successfully breaking it will restore all your energy back and stun it for a brief period of time. failing to break the white shield, it will convert the remainder of what it has into an electro shield, which of course can be broken with cryo and dendro. The general strategy here is to try to use all your elemental bursts and save your elemental skill for later to ensure that you get your damaging abilities up before it saps your energy. It also does have high electro resistance, so if you're trying to bring someone like Cyno, do keep that in mind. Now for the third option, the two okay options I would say is between the Hydro Abyss Mage as well as the Hydro Slime Fungi Lava Chill combo. I would say between the two, the less annoying one is going to be the Lava Chill and Hydro Slime, because we don't have the Hydro element at this season, so there's no real obstacle aside from the Lava Chill having slightly higher electro resistance. The Hydro Abyss Mage, you only have to kill about 7 of them. The DPS is not high, however it does require you to have a team that has very good Hydro shield breaking, notably Cryo is second best and Dendro being the best. I've tried this a few times and it is very much doable, but they don't group up very easily, so preferably if you had to choose between the two, just go for the Lava Chill. And the last two options, this can be tough option, would be the Ruin Robot Gang. So the Ruin Robot Gang, you get like a bunch of Ruin Sentinels and eventually a Grader with a bunch of the Ruin Destroyers. They do have slightly high physical resistance, but it doesn't matter too much because Superconduct will reduce their resistance, and if you pick the Brilliant Blessing buff, you can reduce their physical resistance even further. What's annoying about them is that they're a little bit tanky and there's quite a few of them. I think this one has the second highest amount of HP, but it's also not exactly too difficult compared to some of the previous options. And if you do have the Elite Assault option, you're going to be going against a combination of Fontaine Mechs as well as the Ruin Graders and the Ruin Sentinels. These guys are a little bit spread out, they'll do a little bit more damage, but since this is Act 1, they're not necessarily that tough. But if your team's investment is not strong enough, I don't recommend picking this unless you're confident you can get that extra flower. For Act 2, the best option is the dual Dendro Breacher Primers. So you will start off with 2 Breacher Primers that will, do their special move by creating a Dendro Shield. If you want to group them up together, you can either go all the way to the far left or all the way to the far right. Wait for about 8 to 10 seconds on the timer, and once they're grouped up, you can immediately go back to them and unleash all your abilities. Of course, given that it does have a Dendro Shield, your best option at breaking the shield is utilizing Electro, or if you do have any Fontaine characters, you can apply the Numa or Uja abilities in order to break their shield in a single hit. The other decent option would be the Fatui group. So the Fatui group, you'll have to deal with like one Hydro Gunner and the Electro Hammer, and as well as the Anemo Boxer. The strategy here is to try to go for the Hydro Gunner, since he is essentially the Barbara or the healer of the team. The other two will naturally come towards you, so you don't have to worry too much. After you take care of the first wave, the second wave will be a singular Fatui Anemo operative. Aside from the whole Bond of Life mechanic, it does do a bit of damage and she doesn't get staggered very easily, but there's nothing of note to say here. As for the other decent options, we do have the Koholosaur and the Hydro Wayop Manifestation, which can be a bit tricky because both of these guys have boosted Hydro resistance, but it's not relevant for this theatre. The Koholosaurus has no particular strategy, just focus on one of them, the other two will come up to you because they're melee units. Now once you do get to the Hydro Wayop Manifestation, similar stick with the previous act with the Thundering Wayop, use all your elemental bursts, all your abilities before it saps your energy, and then make sure you break it, and if it does create the Hydro Shield, you can use Dendro or Cryo abilities to break it fast. Now the other specific options would be the Primal Construct combo as well as the Eremites. The first wave will be just simply 3 Eremites. For my personal experience, you want to go to the Double Sword Cryo Eremite all the way to the right because he doesn't have that many moves and he tends to be more of a range unit than a melee unit. The other two will naturally come towards you. Once you enter the second wave, there will be 3 Primal Constructs. You can either go to the far left, I think to the far left of one of the constructs so that they will naturally group together, but as long as you do enough damage and you just make sure to distribute your damage equally, there shouldn't be that much of a problem. However, if your team does not have enough DPS, this chamber does prefer you to have Quicken so that you can actually break the little pillars and apply Electro in order to break them out of their invisibility. Or of course, apply Quicken on their invisible state in order to remove their invisibility completely. The fifth option are just a bunch of Fontaine mechs. There's quite a few of them. While I do consider them to be okay, they are relatively spread out and they're not the most tanky creatures in the world, but them being spread out means it will be a bit more of a time waster. So of course, they're a decent option. And lastly, we do have another Elite Assault challenge with all the Saurian group, with a collective of plenty as well as the Flower Feather Clan. Now, these guys are, you only have to deal with like 2 waves of them. You deal with Collective of Plenty, followed by the Flower Feathered clan. There's nothing of note to them, just their creatures, the Saurians, are, resistant to their own elements like Electro and Pyro. But if you do want to somewhat deal with this effectively, just try to go for the Lady, because the Lady tends to have range attacks. If you can do this, you can. If you can't, feel free to just skip it and choose some of the easier options. Now for Act 3, we do have the Jadeplume Terrorshroom. I don't remember the timing it required for the clear, but I believe it's about 1 to 2 minutes. You do need 70 seconds in order to get the Stellar, which requires about 22,000 DPS. Now at base, it does have a slightly boosted resistance with an extremely high Dendro res. Now the mechanic that he has is that he has a bar above his health, which you can build up with Electro. So building the bar with Electro hits will increase the bar by 2%. However, if you do apply Quicken, Aggravate, or Spread, it builds up 15%. So this boss very much wants you to bring a Quicken or Catalyze team. Whenever the bar is full, it will do one of the 3 possible moves between the Dendro Explosion and launching a bunch of homing motors, or the crazy headbutt spin or the random pegs it does around it, which is actually kind of okay. And the most annoying one would be the charging move. Now, charging move, the best strategy is to try to go to the nearest wall of wherever it's going, and then once it charges to one corner, just make sure you use your elemental burst or iframe it to ensure that he doesn't dash that much. You can either go to do the edge baiting or wall strategy, or what you can simply do if you play a circle impact team is to wait for him to come back to you in the second charge, because it will generally reach almost all the way to the end of the chamber. And once it's down, it will lose a lot of resistance back to 0. It will still have very high Dendro resistance, so I don't recommend running a Dendro-based team here. However, there's nothing much of note. Once you take care of him within the required time, we'll move on to Act 4. So for Act 4, we do have a few options, and the 2 best options for this monolith defense are going to be the Secret Source Automaton Hunter Seeker, as well as the Saurians. So the Secret Source Automaton, there's only 1 Hunter Seeker per wave at a time, so you could always do a pacifist strategy where you just do damage and just try to make sure it doesn't actually attack the monolith. Then you can keep the monolith above like 35% HP and basically get the Stellar. If you do want to kill it, you can try to do that, but it's just an option you can consider. For the second best option, we do have the Saurian groups, where you only have 2 Saurians at a time, where they spawn between each relative groups. So they're not really the strongest enemies in all of these groups, so they are relatively squishy. You can kill them pretty fast, deplete the required time to defense, and they don't really attack too often and they're not too strong. So these are the 3 best options at the moment. Now we do have 2 second best options, tied between the Eremites as well as the Nobushis. Now between the 2, I would personally prefer the Nobushis because they're not exactly too aggressive. They're also very old enemies from Inazuma, so that means they don't really have the highest HP pool. And because they can only spawn 2 at a time, it's very easy for you to draw the aggro and take care of them fast. If you don't have this option, the Eremites are also pretty decent, however they can get a bit annoying. Same strategy, just try to draw the aggro, make sure they don't hit the tower, and the rest is, the same as always. Now for the other option, the doable option would be the Ruined Sentinel group. Now this is the second hardest, even though I say it's doable, it is technically the second most difficult option for the monolith defense, notably because every single one of these Ruined Sentinels have some sort of range ability which are very hard to disable unless you hit their weak point. Strategy is always the same, use taunt abilities, try to draw their aggro away from the tower, but because they spawn quite spread out and all of them have range abilities which can directly damage the monolith, I don't recommend picking this one. And of course, the hardest one is the Elite Defense or the High Pressure Defense option, which does give you more Fantasia Flowers. This one is straight up annoying and obviously difficult because you have to deal with the Ruined Sentinels, and after you kill a certain number of Ruined Sentinels, the Ruined Grader will spawn as well as the Ruined Guard. So unless your characters are incredibly invested or your Brilliant Blessings are at a really high level, I do not recommend wasting your time and making life any difficult, risking the Stellas along the way. Now for Act 5, there's only one best one, as well followed by a few other options. The best one is going to be the Ruined Guard, Ruined Grader combo. So for this one, you only have to really kill like 4, I believe 4 for the minimum and 5 in order to get the Stellas. You alternate between 2 Ruined Guards as well as 2 Ruined Graders, and then it just repeats upon itself. They spawn quite next to each other, like the Ruined Guards literally spawn 1 in front and 1 behind, and the Ruined Graders will spawn 1 to the left and 1 to the right. Given how grouped they are, it is easy for you to minimize the DPS required to clear this chamber as well as get the Stellas. And of course, they do have one of the lowest amount of HP, so it makes them one of the best options for this act. The second best is going to be the Rifthound group. where you simply have to kill, I think about a certain number of Rift Hounds. I can actually double check this right now in my tabbing screen. So yeah, for the Rift Hounds, you have to do about 7 kills for the clear in 2 minutes and 9 kills for the Stellas. And this document, I'll leave the link down in the description below in case you're interested to see the result of my research. So the Rift Hounds do apply corrosion, and you can try to bring a healer, but generally once you get to this point, you probably have lots and lots of HP. So from my experience, healers are not necessary, so try to focus on putting up as much DPS as possible to try to get the clear and the Stellas whenever doable. And generally, because they tend to spawn a lot of these smaller Rift Hounds, you won't have to deal with the large Rift Hounds until the last 2 enemies if you're going for the Stellas. And for the third best options are going to be the Tenebrous Mimesis. I think it's a combination between the Axe Metachill and the Ruin Guard. For this one, generally you just want to bring different reactions like burning, if possible with like Daya or Shengling as the special guest star, or Electrocharge paired together, Ororon or Fischl Beidou together with Kurina or Xingqiu form the special guest stars. So if you do bring these reactions, it will be very ideal, or you have any sort of fast elemental application mechanic, or just Ororon with his abilities, and Sitlali too. Now for the OK option, we do have the Primal Constructs. You do have to kill quite a bit of them, and very likely you might require bringing a Quicken team, but if you have enough DPS, it shouldn't really be a problem, and you don't have to deal with the invisibility. Now the not recommended section is going to be the Mimic Gang. While this season does not have Hydro or Hydro immune enemies, so the element doesn't matter as much, they do spawn like anti-clockwise, and they tend to get a bit more annoying because you do have to run to them, because some of the enemies like the crab doesn't exactly stand still, and one of the guys, the frog and the finch, does explode upon death, which will do a bit of damage to you. So I generally advise against this, so yeah. And the last one, if you want to go against the Saurian groups, you can go for more Fantasia flowers. They're very straightforward. You have to kill like I think 9 to 10 of them or something, and there's no notable mechanics. You just do damage. If you can do this, you can get extra flowers. If you can't, no loss at all. So for Act 6, we do have Cineas, the Baptismal V-Sharp local legend. It does have slightly higher resistance to physical, but notably higher resistance to Hydro. Now a few notable things about this boss. He does have a fixed attack pattern in this particular order. It will start off by doing the dash into a spinning attack, and then for its second attack, it will try to swing twice sideways into a slam. Its third attack will be him charging up the Hydro Ball Shot, which if you get hit by it, you'll drain a good amount of energy, and this applies through your shield. Then the fourth move will always be the part where it shields up. So this move, it will create a Hydro Shield, which can be broken with their respective elements. As long as you stay within its range, it will continuously drain your energy, and eventually if you don't have enough energy, it will slowly drain your health. Now the best elements to break this shield, of course, is going to be Dendro, followed by Cryo, and Electro being the least effective. So while you will lose energy, try to maybe save your elemental burst or whichever Dendro abilities that will help you break the shield, whether it be Cryo or then Dendro elements. Because not having the energy, if you're running characters that are very reliant on elemental burst in order to apply or break the shield, then it's not ideal for you to use it early on. Once you break the shield, similar to the Wyop manifestation, he will restore all your energy back and get stunned temporarily. Now while it does gain the shield, it doesn't actually make it immune to all damage, it just has higher resistance than usual. And then of course it will repeat the same attack pattern again and again, and from my experience, you will generally see him shielding up about twice. So characters that can use or apply their elemental abilities to break the shield without being reliant on burst is very much recommended. Or of course you can use your elemental burst before it actually shields up. For Act 7, the best option is going to be the Ruin Hunter and the Ruin Drake Skywatch. To start off with 2 Ruin Hunters which spawn in front and behind, they can get a bit aggressive and stagger you a little bit here and there, but they're not exactly the tankiest enemy around. Try not to be up in the air or use plunging attacks, otherwise it will fly up in the air and basically do its bombardment attack. If you don't have any bow character here, you are basically screwed. So be careful if anyone out there you're trying to use your Varesa against these group of enemies. The second best option, or I guess apparently I put the third best option here, is going to be the Baptismal V-Shaps. Now these guys do have like boosted resistance to their own elements like Hydro, Cryo, and Electro, but you only have to deal with like 2 of them per wave. So you have to deal with like 2 of the Cryo and Electro hatchling, and then 2 of the Hydro adult Baptismal V-Shaps. So they're not really that much to deal with. You just have to target one. Be sure to dodge the spit attack if you want to maintain your energy, and the rest is, as it is. Now, the other okay option is going to be the Fontaine mech combos. There is quite a few of them. I think you have to kill about like 7 or 8. I don't quite remember the exact statistic, but most of them generally tend to be melee characters or melee attackers. So there's no real grouping here. You just go for one unit, preferably go for the male one, and the females and all the other units will come to you. If you do see the supporting spider mech unit, you can try to go for that instead to minimize or prevent the unit from buffing his teammates. And then we do have the Hydro Hilichurl Rogue combo as well as with the Plunge Weasel. Now this one is annoying for a very specific reason. The Hydro Hilichurl Rogue has nothing of note. It does have high Hydro resistance, but it's not really worth mentioning. And it does have an attack where it summons a Hydro Slime. If you break the Hydro Slime, he'll get stunned for a little bit, but it doesn't really matter too much. Why it's annoying is because of the Plunge Weasel. So the Plunge Weasel will spawn and start by digging into the ground, revealing its special core thing above, generating a white shield. The white shield, unlike, well, let's say the Thundering Wayop or any of the regular Wayop manifestation, is that it is equivalent to its entire HP bar, 100%. So unless you have enough DPS or you do have someone like Veressa in order to do plunging attacks, because plunging attacks do additional damage to the shield, it's going to take you a very long time in order to break the shield as the footage shows right now. So unless you have Veressa for whatever reason, I highly advise against picking challenge. And then the semi-decent one, we do have the Hydro Herald as well as the Wayop Manifestation combo. This chamber is essentially just a Cryo and a Dendro check. Hydro Herald, you bring it down to its low health, enters phase 2 and will generate a Hydro Shield. You have to break the Hydro Shield with Cryo and Dendro in order to kill it. He does have certain attacks where it like shoots out this blade wave or charges out this like 4 omnidirectional blade wave thing. If you get hit by these water blades, your cooldown will be increased, so it's not exactly the most ideal for you. Now, the Elite Assault, the challenging one, which can be fun for some people, would be the Xuanwen Beast as well as the Husk Knights combo. You'll start off with dealing with 4 Xuanwen Beasts with high Anemo and Hydro resistance, and no strategy, just go for one. The other 3 Xuanwen Beasts will naturally group towards you, and afterwards you'll get the Husk Knights group. Now this one, if you want to do the best grouping strategy, try to go for the Cryo Archer Mercy towards the left side, because all the other ones will naturally group towards you. Do be careful though, because they have a mechanic. If you actually have a shield in your team and they hit you with a shield, they will use their respective abilities. Like the Pyro guy will create a Hydro Shield for the entire team, Hydro guy will create a healing aura for the rest, and of course the Geo Berserker will go from a defensive tank mode to an offensive Berserker mode, which does actually do quite a bit of damage. So other than that, the rest is a matter of a DPS check, and if you can clear this, we'll move on to Act 8. So Act 8, we do have ASIMON, which is essentially just a quicken gimmick boss. Although it's not necessary for you to actually play around the quicken mechanic if you have enough DPS. Now it will spawn and start off invisible, so you try to set up your abilities early. Now its first move is to spawn the pillars before going invisible, and there are a few things to keep in note. It has 2 variations of where it summons the pylons. If the spot on the ground that you see is big, which means the falling strategy cannot be used, and the strategy is essentially just, we'll talk about that part later. However, if it does summon these 2 tiny spinny tops Beyblade looking thing, you can try to use your high front-loaded damage abilities or any big PP one-shot move in order to break the tops as they spawn towards you in order to delay its invisibility phase. This will allow you to get more damage through before it goes completely invisible. Once it goes invisible, you do have 2 options. First, you can break the parts, and then once you break the parts, which is about 10% of its total HP, you can hit the Dendro Pylons with Electro in order to remove it from its invisibility. The second option is to identify his current location while it's invisible and apply Quicken in order to immediately break its invisibility. And the rest is, the same as always. Just rinse and repeat the same mechanic until it's dead. If you do find it going invisible for a second time, maybe bringing a Quicken team would be advantageous for this part. And if there's nothing else, we'll move on to Act 9. So for Act 9, we do have quite a few options. Personally, the best one has got to be the Kairagis. So because this is the bounty section, focus on the big boys or the targeted enemies and do not waste your time with all the other filler mobs. Kairagis are the easiest because you only have to deal with one of them at a time with some Nabushis. You do have to kill 3 of them in order to get the clear, or if not the Stellar, but they're not exactly the strongest or tankiest enemies, so there's nothing of note here. The second best is going to be the Electro Rifthounds. While the Rifthounds themselves are quite tanky, you only have to kill, I believe, about 2 or 3 of them. Yeah, It says that you only have to kill about 2 adult Rift Hounds, so they're a little bit tanky, they do have quite a bit of HP, but if you do have enough DPS and granted enough time, it might be possible for you to get this Stellar, because the DPS requirement, as you see right here, is not as high as, well, let's say the best recommendation being the Kairagis. The third best option has got to be the Hydro Phantasm combo. The Phantasms, you only have to kill about 3 other Phantasms and it requires about 7,000 DPS to clear and roughly 11,000 DPS in order to get the Stellas. Now, because these guys are Hydro infused, you can use your characters like Deya or Shangling in order to basically Grain, Fee, Vaporize for additional damage. Now, for all the other options are the ones that I highly advise against. The Hydro Abyss Mage, while they don't have the most HP, you do have to kill about 8 of them in order for the clear. And even if you do bring a Dendro team, they don't really group very easily, and it does take a bit of time to break their shield. So while they themselves are not the tankiest enemies, you do have to kill quite a bit of them. And even on my first personal run, I actually failed to get the Stellas on this part, so please don't do this. And the other annoying option would be the Tenebrous Mimesis. Now, the nice thing about the Mimesis is that there's a lot of hitachos, so if you use someone like Beidou or you run an Electro Charge team, it is going to be quite easy for you to chain all the attacks in order to maximize the Void Ward breaking ability. And if you're familiar with this right now, it basically starts off in its Mimic form, where it has a special Void Ward shield. Each elemental hit counts as 1 hit, and each Natlan infused hit or elemental hit will count as 3 times the amount. Generally, the best strategy is to employ Burning or Electro Charge strategy or any fast-hitting elemental abilities. But other than that, it's just really annoying. You don't have to kill 2 of them, they're not the tankiest, but if you do have other options that I mentioned before, please pick that one over this one. And the last one is going to be the High Pressure Assault, which is essentially just killing Ruin Guards and Ruin Graders. While they are not exactly the most noteworthy enemies, keep in mind that all elite chambers or all high pressure chambers in any act will have slightly higher HP than a regular act at 40% instead of 20. So if you think you're up for the challenge and you would like the last extra flowers for Act 10, feel free to do whatever you need to do. And lastly, we'll move on to the final act. So the final boss is the new Secret Source Automaton boss, the Overseer device. This boss essentially is a cryo check gimmick, so be sure to at least save 2 of your cryo DPS for this part, otherwise you very likely will not be able to clear him very easily. I personally haven't tried going against this boss without a cryo unit because I highly advise against it. So it will start off at the center by doing a special move where it will summon 2 lasers that attack while spinning around the boss, dealing hydro damage. It does have a bar above its head where if it builds up past a certain point, it will summon 2 more lasers and they will eventually spin faster and do more damage as the bar slowly builds up. Now, word of advice is that you absolutely need cryo to deal with this boss, and ideally you want to bring at least 2 cryo units that can consistently apply that element in order to bring the bar down to as low as possible. Because below, I believe, 10 points or 10% of its bar, it will reduce its resistance by a lot, which if you don't have enough cryo, this can be mitigated with the Rimegrass blessing in order to get the additional cryo application. Now, just keep reducing the bar to effectively a very low amount. Take advantage of the part that once its bar is low enough, it will stop doing the move and basically just stand there. So this is your best window at doing damage. But other than that, there's not really anything of note. It will spend quite an extended amount of time in the special mode. So be sure to bring enough cryo units with cryo application to ensure that you can get the damage done. So we do have a new blessing for reaction that doesn't exist, known as Rimegrass, which is between Cryo and Dendro. So what does it do actually? Now to start off with Origin, let me try to zoom in a little bit. Whenever you apply Cryo and Dendro on an enemy, the enemy will receive 45% more Cryo and Dendro damage, and this will also summon a Thorn on the ground, which does both AoE Cryo and Dendro damage at the same time. You can do this effect every 0.5 seconds and summon a maximum of 2 Thorns at a time with a 10-second duration. This is pretty nice for any sort of Cryo Dendro application, and generally the theme that you're about to see later is that Rimegrass is mostly focused on buffing not only Cryo and Dendro, but as well as Electro. Now from here we do have 2 different branchings path, which the top half will be focused more towards buffing Electro, while the bottom half is more focused towards like a neutral buff personal damage based thing. So in Inceptive Electrovine, whenever you apply Electro to the enemy within the Thorn's range itself, the Thorn will convert into an Electro form, dealing 1.5 times more damage and has a higher attack frequency. But what this also means is that you no longer get the cryo and dendro damage from the origin buff, but this only applies if you actually apply electro within the range of the thorn. This is quite nice for a bit of extra damage if your team is not as well invested, and maybe if you play a spread or aggravate team and you do need some consistent electro, this is actually pretty nice for that purpose. The other option for level 2 is Inceptive Magnetovine. Whenever you apply electro within the thorn's range, the thorn changes to a buff totem, or mostly just a buff purpose, where it no longer does any damage. However, enemies within the range of the thorn will take 45% more electro, cryo, and dendro damage. Since there can only be 2 thorns at a time, you can theoretically achieve a maximum of 90% additional damage for these respective elements. This one is mostly focused for like a personal buff stuff, but granted the enemy doesn't move a lot and stands within the range of the thorn, so otherwise it should be pretty consistent if you do want to buff your own personal damage. For level 3 evolution, you get another 5% cryo and additional dendro damage, and you also get extra damage from the thorn on itself, which means you basically get 50% additional instead of 45. Now for the 2 branches, we do have the Electro Path, which will start off with Apex Thorn Sprawl. The Electro Thorn that has already been converted, whenever it hits an enemy, they will lose 30% Electro resistance. This is pretty nice if your team is mostly an Electro-centric team. The other option which you can choose is Apex Thorn Spike. It basically increases the damage of your Electro Thorn by another 40%, which is nice if your team is less invested. For the neutral option, we have Apex Frosthorn and Tractorhorn. So for Frosthorn, the buff thorn, whenever it's already converted, it will give another additional 22.5% cryo, dendro, and electro damage bonus with a maximum of 45%. So essentially, the 90% that you can get here with 2 thorns can now be increased all the way to 135% additional cryo, dendro, and electro damage, additional bonus damage to the enemy within the thorn. So this is really nice for anyone who wants more of a personal damage buff. And lastly, we do have Apex Tractorhorn, where if you're within the buff thorn, your character essentially gains 300 elemental mastery. So if you run like a Hyper Bloom or Burgeon based team, this will be pretty nice, but otherwise the other one is straight up better. Now for Catalyze, let's look at Origin. Whenever you trigger Quicken, Aggravate, or Superconduct, you basically trigger an instance of AoE dendro damage every 6 seconds. It's nice for a little bit of extra damage and dendro application to refresh the Quicken aura. Now we have 2 options between the top half is for electrocentric, while the bottom half is more dendrocentric. For level 2, Rudimentary Resonance, whenever the enemy has Quicken, they will lose 10% electro and dendro resistance, as well as it will trigger an instance of AoE electro damage every 6 seconds. Now the other option, it basically increases the damage of your AoE dendro from Origin, or increases the AoE as well as decreasing the trigger interval from 6 seconds to 4 seconds. For Catalyze Evolution, the AoE dendro damage, well, the damage itself is just increased, so nothing of note here. Now for the Electro Path, we have Supreme Shadow Bolt, where if you deal Electro or Dendro on enemies already affected by Quicken, you will basically build up a tally, or stacks. For every stack you have on this enemy, your Thunder you get from the Rudimentary Resonance will do 30% additional damage for the next proc. You can basically build up all the way to 10 stacks, maximum of 300%, so your big lightning you get from level 2 will do a lot more damage. However, keep in mind that these stacks will clear after the thunder strikes. If you want to go for this build-up path and your team can apply Electro and Dendro on Quicken enemies really fast, this would be pretty nice to buff your own team's damage. Otherwise, Supreme Storm will increase the AoE of the Thunder as well as increase the damage by 200%. Now, if you do have the Dendro path, you have Apex Abundance, where whenever Vigorous Nexus or the AoE Dendro thing hits an enemy, you will create a field at your position where standing on it will increase your character's Electro and Dendro damage bonus by 50%. Such a field, only one can exist at a time and can be created every 7.5 seconds. You can go for this path if you want to buff your own personal damage rather than focusing on the other instance of damage that isn't from your character. The other path is Sundering Nexus, where you essentially add a 25 flat damage per 1 elemental mastery for whichever unit in your team that has the highest EM value. Basically, it's also more of a external damage kind of buff. If you do have a Nahida of 800 to 1000 EM, you can probably reach up to 2k additional for Vigorous Nexus. So if your team doesn't have very good or like investment or damage, you can probably consider getting this. But otherwise, I think the personal damage buff is definitely the best thing to take right here. And lastly, we do have Superconduct. For Origin, whenever you apply Superconduct, you decrease the enemy's cryo resistance by 3% and physical rest by 6% for every stack. You can build up to a maximum of 6 stacks, totaling to 18% cryo rest and 36% physical rest rate. These stacks will last a total of 12 seconds, and I don't remember if the duration is like refreshing or is it individual. And as usual, we do have 2 different paths. One focuses more on the electro and pseudo-physical path, while the other one focuses more on cryo. I think I messed up the arrangement a bit, but bear with me on that one. So for Surging Bombardment, whenever you do physical on an enemy affected by Superconduct, you will add another additional stack for the rest threat from Origin, as well as an instance of physical damage every 3 seconds, which both of them will build stacks, so this part doesn't really matter. If you do want more physical damage, you can probably go for this one, or you can go for low resistant linkage. So for low resistant linkage, whenever you deal cryo and electro on a superconducted enemy, you also build another stack of the rest threat, and for every stack you have, the enemies will take 8% more cryo and electro damage. This is pretty nice for more cryo and electro DPS and less of physical DPS. Evolution adds another additional 1% cryo and 2% physical rest threat for Origin, so even more rest threat over there. And for the top half, we do have the 2 elemental paths. We have Charged Storm, where if an enemy reaches the max debuff, the AoE electro damage will occur on them every 4 seconds. Nice for a non-personal damage build. Or you can go for Systematic Collapse, where you get 10% physical damage bonus for every debuff stack that is available on the enemy. The other path, we do have Winter's Reprise, which is the same thing as Charged Storm, but instead of electro, it does cryo. And then Systematic Shock, where it buffs that physical damage instance from up here, which I think I messed up the arrangement a little bit, for 100%, and also the AoE is increased. I would say generally Superconduct is not going to be the biggest one out of the 3 reactions, but you can get at the very least maybe the first 2 to 3 levels if you do want to maximize your cryo rest rate and maybe get a bit of electro damage bonus. Pair it up together with the likes of Catalyze and Rimegrass, and all 3 of these reactions will work pretty well. Just make sure to maybe check out the images or the Google Docs guide down in the link description below, or of course pause the video to take your time to read it. Hopefully I'm not blocking any of these things right now, and you should be able to find the best possible combo to actually maximize your whichever damage or whichever clear goals that you have in mind. And that is it for this Theatre's Guide video. Hopefully you guys found this guide informative or at least entertaining enough. So whether you like it or not, or whether you find this to be useful, feel free to hit that like button. And I decided to not cover the mystery cache and all the different effects, because I will be doing that in an upcoming video later on called the Advanced Guide to Theatre. So if you are interested in that, feel free to hit the subscribe button to stick around for more endgame guides and content. And I wish you the best of luck in your future clears, regardless of whether it is your theater and your spiral abyss. But that is it for now, and this is Ethereal signing off, wishing you the best of luck in your future endeavors. Peace out, everyone.